Gaslighting. Gaslighting is not an argument technique. It is a reality-altering technique. Instead of attacking what you do or how you feel, gaslighting attacks how you perceive the world. The manipulator's goal is not to win a discussion, but to make you unsure that your version of events is even valid. It begins subtly. A sentence is denied. A tone is minimized. A promise is reframed. That never happened. You're remembering it wrong. You're overreacting. Each instance appears insignificant. Together, they form a pattern that destabilizes the mind. The human brain relies on internal coherence to feel safe. Memory, perception, and emotional interpretation are constantly cross-checking each other. When those signals align, the brain experiences certainty. Gaslighting disrupts this alignment. When someone you trust repeatedly contradicts your perception, the brain experiences cognitive dissonance. There are two possible resolutions. Either the other person is lying, or your perception is unreliable. Because the manipulator presents themselves calmly and confidently, the brain often chooses the second option. This is not a character flaw. It is a survival mechanism. Over time, the victim begins to externalize certainty. They stop trusting their memory. They ask for confirmation. They hesitate before asserting facts. They replay conversations obsessively, searching for proof. Eventually, they apologize not because they are wrong, but because apologizing restores temporary psychological stability. Gaslighting works especially well in asymmetrical relationships: romantic partners, authority figures, parents, supervisors. The more emotional or structural power the manipulator holds, the more effective the technique becomes. Neurologically, prolonged gaslighting increases anxiety and hypervigilance. The brain remains in a constant state of uncertainty, scanning for errors. Decision-making becomes exhausting. Confidence erodes not because competence disappears, but because trust in internal signals collapses. The most dangerous aspect of gaslighting is that it often looks reasonable from the outside. There is no shouting, no overt aggression. The manipulator appears composed, the victim appears confused, and that reversal is the entire point. Love bombing. Love bombing is manipulation through emotional acceleration. It overwhelms the target with affection, validation, attention, and future promises before emotional boundaries have time to form. Messages arrive constantly. Compliments are intense and frequent. Connection feels immediate and unusually deep. From a neurological perspective, love bombing floods the brain with dopamine and oxytocin. Dopamine drives anticipation and excitement. Oxytocin creates bonding and trust. When released together and rapidly, they bypass critical evaluation. The brain interprets intensity as significance. High emotional stimulation signals importance, even when evidence is lacking. This is why love bombing feels magical. It creates the illusion of deep connection without the time normally required to build it. The target feels chosen, understood, and emotionally seen. But love bombing is not about love. It is about attachment control. Once the emotional bond is established, the dynamic shifts. Attention becomes inconsistent. Validation is withdrawn or rationed. The warmth that once felt unconditional becomes conditional. The victim does not interpret this as manipulation. They interpret it as loss. The brain remembers the initial emotional high and begins trying to recreate it. Behavior changes. Boundaries soften. Self-blame increases. If I could just go back to how it was. That sentence keeps people trapped. Love bombing exploits a fundamental cognitive bias. Humans assume early intensity reflects authenticity. In reality, healthy bonds grow steadily. Manipulative bonds peak early and decay strategically. The withdrawal phase is not accidental. It is the control phase. Intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement is not a relationship pattern. It is a conditioning mechanism. It works by delivering rewards unpredictably. Affection, attention, validation, or approval appears suddenly, then disappears without explanation. There is no pattern the victim can rely on. Psychologically, this is one of the strongest ways to shape behavior. The brain responds more intensely to unpredictable rewards than consistent ones. Dopamine spikes higher when the reward is uncertain. This is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. The victim becomes hyper-aware. Every message, silence, facial expression, or tone is analyzed. When the reward returns, it feels euphoric. When it disappears, anxiety takes over. Over time, the victim stops acting authentically. They begin performing, adjusting, anticipating, trying to guess the invisible rules. The manipulator does not need to issue commands. The uncertainty does the work. Intermittent reinforcement is especially destructive because it feels like hope. The reward does come back, just often enough to keep the person emotionally invested. From a neurological standpoint, this pattern creates dependency. The brain associates relief with the manipulator's approval. Emotional regulation becomes externalized. This is not love. It is behavioral conditioning, and it is extraordinarily difficult to break once established. Guilt manipulation. Guilt manipulation uses empathy as leverage. Instead of asking directly for compliance, the manipulator frames themselves as emotionally harmed by the other person's boundaries, needs, or decisions. Responsibility is subtly transferred. "You're hurting me. After everything I've done for you, I wouldn't treat you this way." These statements activate guilt, one of the strongest social regulators humans possess. From an evolutionary perspective, guilt exists to preserve group cohesion. It prevents behavior that harms others. Manipulators exploit this instinct. When guilt is triggered, the brain seeks immediate relief. The fastest way to reduce guilt is compliance. The victim gives in not because they agree, but because they want the discomfort to stop. Over time, this creates a dangerous association. Asserting needs causes pain to others. The victim learns to suppress themselves to preserve emotional harmony. Boundaries disappear. Emotional labor increases. Resentment builds silently. Guilt manipulation does not require aggression. It requires moral framing, and moral framing is extremely effective against conscientious people. Triangulation. Triangulation is manipulation through comparison. Instead of confronting you directly, the manipulator introduces a third element into the relationship. This element can be a real person, a hypothetical person, or an abstract group opinion. "My ex never had this problem. Other people agree with me. Anyone else would understand." The purpose is not information, it is destabilization. Human brains are extremely sensitive to social ranking. For most of human history, being excluded from the group meant danger, loss of protection, or death. The brain still reacts to comparison as a threat, even in modern settings. Triangulation activates insecurity and competition. The victim feels implicitly replaceable. They begin measuring themselves against an invisible standard they can never fully see or satisfy. This creates behavioral adjustment without direct command. The victim tries harder, explains more, justifies themselves, changes tone, changes boundaries. The manipulator never needs to say, "Do better." The fear does it for them. In relationships, triangulation often appears as subtle references to others. In workplaces, it appears as unnamed colleagues or what people expect. In families, it appears as favoritism. The power of triangulation lies in ambiguity. The third element is never fully defined, which prevents direct confrontation. You cannot argue against a shadow. Over time, the victim internalizes comparison as self-surveillance. Control becomes automatic. Silent treatment. The silent treatment is punishment through emotional absence. There is no explanation, no discussion, no resolution. Communication simply stops. For the brain, social disconnection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Silence is not neutral. It is perceived as threat. When silence occurs, the victim's mind begins searching for cause. Conversations are replayed, messages are reread, apologies are prepared, responsibility is assumed. The manipulator does not need to accuse. The silence creates self-blame. This reverses accountability. Instead of addressing the issue, the victim seeks forgiveness. They approach carefully. They lower expectations. They minimize needs. The silent treatment trains one lesson. Connection is conditional. Used repeatedly, it teaches people to avoid conflict at all costs. Emotional expression becomes dangerous. Silence becomes authority. What makes this technique effective is its deniability. The manipulator can claim they needed space or were too overwhelmed to talk, but the outcome is the same: control through withdrawal. The victim card. The victim card is manipulation through moral inversion. Here, the manipulator positions themselves as the injured party, regardless of context. Any challenge becomes cruelty. Any boundary becomes abuse. Any disagreement becomes proof of harm. I'm always the one who gets hurt. You're attacking me. I can't believe you'd say that to me. Humans are deeply reluctant to harm those they perceive as victims. Empathy suppresses confrontation. Manipulators exploit this instinct. By presenting themselves as fragile, misunderstood, or persecuted, they prevent accountability. Anyone who insists on clarity appears heartless. Over time, the actual victim becomes the caretaker. They regulate emotions, avoid triggering reactions, and suppress frustration. The manipulator remains untouchable. This technique is especially effective in public or social environments where appearing compassionate matters. The manipulator controls the moral narrative, making dissent socially risky. The victim card does not require innocence. It requires performance. Narrative control. Narrative control is the most advanced form of manipulation. It is not about individual behaviors. It is about defining meaning. The manipulator shapes how events are interpreted, what is normal, what is dramatic, what is rational, what is overreacting. Over time, the victim adopts this framework. Facts become secondary to interpretation. Patterns are minimized. Contradictions are reframed. The story always resolves in the manipulator's favor. Once narrative control is established, resistance feels illogical, even to the victim. Thoughts arise, then self-censor. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe this isn't that bad. Maybe I'm the problem. This is the final stage of manipulation. Behavior no longer needs to be enforced. Meaning enforces itself. When someone controls the story, they control reality. Manipulation is rarely obvious. It does not announce itself. It builds quietly through repetition, emotional leverage, and subtle pressure. These techniques are not rare. They exist in relationships, families, workplaces, and institutions. Most people experience at least one of them in their lifetime. Understanding manipulation is not about paranoia. It is about clarity. When a pattern has a name, it loses power. When a behavior is recognized, it can be resisted. Manipulation thrives in confusion and self-doubt. Awareness restores orientation. The goal is not to accuse. The goal is to see. Explaining things simply.